when everyone is saying the same thing and you can't talk about your product because no one cares. You can't talk about the desire for your product because everyone else is saying the same thing. And you can't even talk about the need.
The police often question him just because they find him interesting. His beard alone has experienced more than a lesser man's entire body. His blood smells like cologne. He is the most interesting man in the world.
I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis. Stay thirsty, my friends.
There's so much to love about this creative. Justin, being the advertising historian, are there any insights? Oh, here we go. Wonderful. The advertising historian.
Yes.
What do we need to know about this creative?
First of all, I did not work on this campaign, but I hung around a lot, Euro in New York and stuff when it was being owned by them. And a couple of friends of mine were working on it in the later years. And unofficially, definitely some of the lines that I've joked around with actually ended up appearing in some of the spots, not in the one that we saw here, but the history of this concept is beautiful. It is a beautiful lesson. And it goes a little bit to what I was saying before about Ryan Reynolds' approach to this, where he's like, you can't take this selling thing so seriously, right? And a lot of what Paul Feldwick talks about in his books, the world famous strategist, The Anatomy of Humbug, right? And Why Does the Peddler Sing? A little of showmanship, right? And a sort of laid back attitude. So Carl Lieberman and Brandon Henderson, right, were the creators, the team that came up with this. The interesting thing is they've been working on the account for a while, but they were getting really tired of it because they kept coming up with ideas and nothing was getting through. And a new strategist, they call insight strategist, I forget her last name, Caroline was her first name. She presented them with like a new insight, which was, and I wrote it down. Oh yes, she said men in their 20s are generally desperate to be seen more interesting than they are. And Brandon and Carl, they felt like it was a little bit demeaning, a little bit insulting, a little bit. And so they decided to, rather than answer the brief, to make fun of it. And the result was the world's most interesting man. And that is the origin story of how the world's most interesting man was invented, by making fun of the brief that they received. I think that is a beautiful lesson. I know you as a strategist probably don't like to hear that. Sometimes it just happens that way. And definitely, a lot of the things Paul Feldwick talks about in his books definitely leads to that kind of to that atmosphere. So that's the history of the campaign. Why it works, first, I'd be I'm actually curious to hear from you about why you think it works, because on an advertising level, and maybe this is the answer to why it works, which was making fun of the brief. On advertising, it breaks tons of rules. I mean, the client even says, I don't, like, it's a beer commercial, and he says, I don't always drink beer, but when I do, like, your main spokesperson doesn't always drink beer. Like, that's an interesting line to say, right? And also, you have a senior citizen, right? That the category, the target market here is men in their 20s, 30s, whatever. And the spokesperson, so Budweiser used to use lizards and frogs, whatever. But at the time that this ad was made, most beer commercials were, people on the beach and partying and, blah, blah, blah. And so here you have a senior citizen, right, as the spokesperson of a beer brand selling to targeting 20s and 30-year-olds, which at the time I was, plus a good portion of the commercial is not about the beer. It's about him. It's you want to talk to me about a celebrity taking over, distracting from the ad and stuff like that. Of course, this person didn't become a celebrity. The actor didn't become a celebrity till later. The persona didn't, eventually became a celebrity. One thing I will say is that the casting here is also amazing, right? This is not skimpy casting. This is Will Lyman is the voiceover. He's a very, very famous voiceover actor for commercials here and movies in general here in the States, at least. And then Jonathan I think it's Goldsmith, Goldblum. I think it's Jonathan Goldsmith is the actor who plays the world's most interesting man. And then they retired him. He retired him with an ad that sent him to the moon. And then they had a new guy come in and play him, but that only lasted like 2 years. Eventually, I think they retired this campaign in 2018. But interestingly enough, the character, which I don't understand from a legal perspective, but the world's most interesting man, as the world's most interesting man, has appeared after that by Jonathan Goldsmith in a Stella ad, and also in several years ago, 3 years ago, in a tequila ad. I don't know legally how that works, but but then it's also a meme, right? It's the perfect formula for a meme. And just like the ads, just like Where's the Beef from last week, and which when we were talking about Where's the Beef, I also brought up I Can't Believe I Ate the Whole Thing and Try It, You'll Like It, and Always a Bridesmaid's Always a Bride from print ads from Listerine. The structure of what he's saying has become a slogan, which is interesting in and of itself. And then which stay thirsty, my friends, which is like kind of like the line that was hoping to be that, didn't. It's still somewhat known, but no one goes around saying that. So one thing, and then I'll leave it over to you to hear what your analysis of this is, because I'm really curious, because like I said, it broke all the rules. But the one rule that I see that I notice here is that it uses this catchphrase. So maybe there's something to catchphrases that we're missing in a lot of advertising these days. Because they're extremely memorable, at least for the long term. But now I hand it off to you.
Well, they are, and as soon as you get a catchphrase that gets into vernacular, you win. Just as long as you can actually brand to it. I love that. There's three key points here that I want to cover off. One that you mentioned was this ad was based on research, about understanding the market and what is actually going on. And I see far too many brands jump into wanting the idea without really understanding what the idea or what basis for the idea should be, or if at best it's just a couple of them knocking around a few ideas. And there's several brands we're working with in Australia right now that are absolutely flying, and all of the ideas have come from research. And that's the foundation from where all good advertising should come from. Research should be a fundamental part of the process of creating any assets, rather than just jumping to the fun, sexy part of, spending a lot of money and, creating something that you want to create. The second, this really plays, we've got three brains. We've got a reptilian brain, a mammalian brain, we've got a neocortex. And this really taps into the mammalian, which is our herd animal.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah.
So we're looking at our herd animal here, and we're looking at the most interesting man in the world. And if we're looking at creating an ad that's talking to young males in particular, or young men, what do they want? They want to live a life that, is interesting, it's bold, it's daring. They want to get to their 50s, 60s, 70s and be this guy that have, the world's strongest beard, blood that smells like cologne. It really taps into masculinity as well. Yeah, so what advertising is, you also buy an identity when you buy a brand. So when you buy this beer and you hold it up, you're buying the identity of this individual, of the most interesting man in the world, so that when someone else sees it, they're like, oh, I see what you're doing. You know, that's especially when it comes to alcoholic beverages, it's all about buying an identity. So they bought an identity here and they've wrapped it up in what I believe is like a great mini story. Like you've seen this guy's life and what he's done and some challenges. And like the bear scene stands out to me as he opens up the bear trap. You know, he's not afraid. He has no fear. This is the identity that you want to buy. So that's the character. And the reason I've thrown this one in the end, because there is no celebrity. They've created their own character, which they own, and there's no misconception around the character is the brand. You cannot get that wrong.
Right. I mean, this is like David Ogilvy playbook with the man in the Hathaway shirt, the Schweppes guy, Flo from Progressive, to a certain extent, the Old Spice guy, right? So, yeah.
So when you create your own character, you have a long-term branded asset that cannot be mistaken for any other brand. You own it. Celebrity, on the other hand, could go to any brand. You don't have control over them. And worse still, if their brand equity increases, you've just got to pay a hell of a lot more. So this is why I love creating your own characters, paying overs, trying to leverage the attributes you're trying to harvest from or from a celebrity. So this has all the good stuff in it. So that, like, the framework of it is a great story. It's the identity that you're buying into. And if you're looking to the frame of it, the first line has you. You know, 80 cents in the dollar is spent in the first 3 to 4 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Police often question him, as they often find him interesting. You're like, oh, wow. You know, so he's got this real level of intrigue. Who is this guy that police just want to arrest him to find out more about him? Do you know? And it just goes through. So I love everything about it. From a performance perspective, I know sales increased by over 22% in a really short amount of time. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the fastest growing beer brands at that particular time. So this absolutely hit it out of the park. And, you know, created the foundation for the brand that is today. But
an interesting comparison too, because the whole mammalian brain and herd brand thing. So in Eugene Schwartz's access of when to create a good ad, or, you know, the formula, you know, where he says product awareness and brand sophistication. So when you get into a brand sophistication model, or when you get to a point where the advertising is just completely saturated, where the benefit to product is all used up, when the mechanism to benefit the product, you know, when that game has changed, you know, so it's like the first cigarettes ads, all they had to say was it's tasty, right? Then eventually it went from I'm tasty, then everyone's saying how flavorful it is. So then, you know, another brand comes along and says it's toasted. That's why it's tasty. So they go from the mechanism. Then everyone else starts doing that. So then what do you do when everyone is saying the same thing and you can't talk about your product because no one cares? You can't talk about the desire for your product because everyone else is saying the same thing. And you can't even talk about the need because everyone else is saying that. The only thing you have left is your mammalian brain, is the herd. The only thing you have left is your market and the identity of your market. And so, like in the famous example that Eugene Schwartz talks about, he says, so in comes Marlboro and the Marlboro Man, right? Just a picture of a cowboy smoking a cigarette, and he has tattoos, which at the time was not a normal thing, you know, and they completely disrupted the market, right? In that sense, I think that this is also a test case of probably the same thing is going on here.
It's 100%. And especially if you're looking at younger individuals, they're desperate. They're still trying to figure out what is their identity. Yeah. You know, and the way that they create their own identity is take bits of everyone else's to create their own. Exactly. And especially young men, one of the traits that'll never go away, because it's closely linked to, you know, testosterone, is masculinity. There's always going to be a market that wants to be masculine and appear masculine. You know, you got the male, like, it's very easy if you create that masculine image, but probably now in today's society, it's a little bit more challenging because of everything that's going on, and it's masculinity is deemed as,
or it depends.
So look, it's very much the identity that they've created that you buy into for this, that it wins. And if you look at FMCG, that's what a lot of FMCG is. It's buying into the identity. The one thing I did want to loop back on was several other brands using the most interesting man in the world. So it sounds like they don't have any trademark or copyright over that particular entity, which is interesting. And do you know the Energizer Bunny?
Yeah, of course.
Do you know that used to be the Duracell Bunny?
No. Wow, you stumped me. I'm the history guy. I did not know that. I'm going to look that up. I don't believe you.
So yeah, it used to be the Duracell Bunny, and the rumor has it that Duracell actually lapsed their IP,
Wow.
and Energizer took it and ran with it.
Wow.
They'll just make sure that you're looking at your long-term branded assets, and legally you have them wrapped up nice and tight, so no one can leverage.
There are room for lawyers in your world, in our world. Okay. Yeah, definitely.
Well, again, like if they had wrapped up the most interesting man in the world, no one else would be able to use it. And yeah.